What is up, Charger fans? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast. I am your host today, Kyle, hosting you guys for the first time as an official member of the Guilty as Charged team, and I couldn't be more thrilled. I figured, why not take it back to where we started? I've been so thrilled seeing you guys reach out on Twitter in the comment section asking questions like, hey, what does the Van Noy signing mean for our compensatory pick formula? And it's a great question. I don't know. I've been wondering the same thing. So why not, in my first video hosting you guys as a member of the team, we kind of do a little review, a shout out back to our first video together with the compensatory pick formula, and provide an update on what these recent signings will likely mean for our compensatory pick disbursement in 2024, which means, our cancellation chart for 2023, how these acquisitions are going to affect that. So, our original cancellation chart. Now, for those that missed the first video, I'll try to make sure that we get a link to that video in the description of this one. I would recommend you watch that one first. But if you already kind of know your compensatory picks, or if you watched that video, you're in the right spot. So, as you know, we already projected, it was already written in stone that we were not going to be getting compensatory picks in 2023. Our cancellation chart for 2022 was already going to way too heavily favor us bringing in a lot of talent versus us letting talent go. So as you can see, we let go of 3 individuals that ended up signing for, compensatory qualifying contracts, but we brought in 4. And it was pretty clear after these 3, Nwosu, Jones, and White, left, that there wasn't going to be somebody behind them that was going to really rake in some dough for us. And I actually thought we might have added 1 or 2 more that would have been qualifiers for the compensatory pick formula, but that wasn't the case. So you can see I have my little wish list down there for what we could have done. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But as you can see, I do keep receipts. I had my wish list, David Quessenberry, Dearness Johnson, O'Day Abushi, and Tyrann Mathieu. And I went 0 for 4. So I apologize. Like I said, I am not in the office. I do not have any sway over Tom Telesco. But the actual signings that happened aren't the ones I would have made, except Kyle Van Noy was a brilliant signing. I love that one. But there would have been other things I would have done differently with this offseason personally. But I'm very happy with where we are right now. And I do think we're still in a great position with the compensatory formula for next year. So this is a quick breakdown of the signings that even have a remote possibility of affecting the compensatory formula next year. Some of the people on here are going to immediately be like, there's no way. But, Kyle Van Noy, and sorry, the first 4 were just our major signings that are going to affect future seasons. But all of the more recent ones are only 1-year deals, which is great. And many of these players are going to be in positions where they will have an opportunity to, perform, to get the ball in their hands, or, get some good rotational reps on D that might justify them getting a decent contract next year. The recent signings being, for those that are, listening and not watching, Kyle Van Noy, DeAndre Carter, Bryce Callahan, Will Clapp, Troy Reeder, and Christian Covington. So again, there's still a little bit of meat on the bone for opportunity out there in my mind, but I'm pretty happy with where we're sitting right now. It's pretty exciting. So let's take a look at real quick what this did to our projections for our unrestricted free agents in 2023. Jalen Guyton is listed on here, although he's technically a restricted free agent. But if you don't tender a restricted free agent, he then becomes an unrestricted free agent. So that's what I'm focusing on here. But anyway, our complete list of the 2023 unrestricted free agents that I'm predicting could potentially have an impact on the formula, or just players I wanted to talk about right now, are Jerry Tillery, Nasir Adderley, Christian Covington, Jalen Guyton, Trey Pipkins, Drew Tranquill, Storm Norton, Donald Parham, Kyle Van Noy, Bryce Callahan, Troy Reeder, and DeAndre Carter. That's a pretty good grouping. And if you remember from our previous video, what we're hoping for is at least 4 of these players take off in a way this year that is going to justify them getting a contract next year that's going to qualify for a compensatory pick. So as you're looking at this list, can you see 4? Can you see 5 or 6? Because what if Tom does want to bring in a free agent, even though his buddy Kyle Cantano is begging him not to? That would be something that would help. If we have 6 guys that leave, then we can bring in a compensatory free agent or 2. Or Tom just focuses on trading and signing after that period. We'll see. But I see a few players here that I think could make an impact, both to the Chargers this season and to the Chargers in future seasons by walking and getting paid next year. There's still a little meat on the bone that we'll visit at the end of the video, like I said, but let's break down the market projections for some of these players right after we get a reminder of what teams are looking for when signing somebody in the free agency. So what are teams going to pay for? How are we going to get some of these CFAs, compensatory free agents, the most money possible to bring in some good draft capital? Well, remember, teams will prioritize, first and foremost, production with a recency bias, age, health, what position the individual plays, and whether or not they were on a winning team. Winning can make up for a lot of deficiencies in a player's skill set. If he's had some recent success, he's definitely going to get paid a little bit more. If he's playing deep into the playoffs or maybe in the Super Bowl, that's one reason why teams often have Super Bowl hangovers, is because it's so hard to retain all those players that have had, the better season that comes with being on a Super Bowl team. You would think that statistically they did well individually, and all the postseason exposure they get. It's pretty significant. And just as a little note, speed is also a little tertiary priority that pushes up values for wide receivers and DBs. So that is something that you got to note. When players have this like unreal athletic trait, it could even be like insane strength that is paired with, that is something of importance for their given position, that might edge them up just a tiny bit because, hey, that's something that can't be coached. So anytime you have those kind of athletically, gifted kind of outliers, they might get a little uptick in pay as well. So let's start off our market projections with Jerry Tillery. And as you'll see with the ages of each player, that is their age in the season that they will, in the off season that they'll be re-signing, basically. Or signing with another team. So next year. In next off season, Jerry Tillery will be right around 27. He currently has 98 tackles and 9.5 sacks to his name, which is not impressive. The only little shred of hope there is it has steadily grown each year. What is extremely interesting is Tillery's in a season right now where he is going to have the most talent he's ever had around him. That's pretty unquestionable at this point. It's undeniable. We have Mack on one side, Bosa on another, and I would say I think both interior defensive linemen that we brought in, and Sebastian Joseph Day and Austin Johnson, are better fits than anyone else we've ever had on that D line. So Tillery's in this position where, as a former first round pick, he has been the most, unproductive player on that line, which should mean he has the most opportunity to have a bounce back big year. That to me is interesting. Now, in looking at my comps, those guys to the right, they all had better PFF scores than Tillery by a mile. Tillery's PFF scores are terrible. But give the guy one solid year. Give him a year with elite talent around him. And if he, let's just say, gets 7 or 8 sacks, which is an uptick for him, I know that would be pretty insane. But I also don't think there's any excuse for him not to get that kind of production when he has so much talent around him. And that's what I'm really hoping for right now. Now, let's say he has a 30, 40 tackle season, around 8 sacks, a half a sack a game. All of a sudden, you're looking at about 140 tackles in his career, maybe 130, let's just say, and 17 and a half sacks. So some of these players play different roles for their teams, but it's kind of hard to judge a Jerry Tillery defensive end type against, a Harrison Phillips who's more of just a run stuffer. But I'm doing the best I can here, so please forgive me. But Florenzo, here, please forgive me here. Fatakusi is the first guy. Sorry, butchering names left and right. He's had 3 full seasons of play with 115 tackles and 3 sacks. Florenzo went and got himself $10 million a year with that production. Very impressive. Same age as well. DJ Jones in 5 seasons had 126 tackles and 7 sacks. Also got $10 million a year. Harrison Phillips, more of a run-stuffing defensive tackle, hasn't put up the big stats, but has been, pretty solid in the middle. 4 seasons, 107 tackles and 1.5 sacks. Got him 6.5 mil. So if Jerry can get himself 8 sacks, and basically that would put him as kind of an outlier in these comps, but there weren't too many young defensive end comps available for me that were like, a Jerry Tillery type player. So it was very hard to gather a great, strong supporting value for him. But I do believe if he were to have an 8 sack season at his age, teams would look at that and say, yeah, that's a player that's on the rise. That's a player that's, hitting his stride, is, coming into his best years, coming into his prime. Most teams would probably look at it and say, yeah, but he was also surrounded by Mack and Bosa. But are there teams that would bet on him? Yes. Like, Arjun said in the draft, why a reach is, often a reach, and why a steal is almost never a steal. It only takes one person to reach. It only takes one person to overpay. The other part of this strategy is probably buying the Jaguars GM season tickets to our games and paying for his flights out here, because that dude likes to spend money. But anyway, if we get $10 million a year for our guy Jerry Tillery, there's a good chance we get around $10 million for him, which would be awesome. If we get $10 million a year for him, there's a good chance we get a 5th round compensatory pick for him, which would be awesome. Jalen Guyton, another guy that he's been a little more steady than Jerry, I'd say, which is kind of crazy to say aloud, but being that he's an undrafted free agent, but he's carved out a decent role on this team. And in really only 2 years of stats, he's had 3 seasons, but I think that first season didn't add to a year of his veterancy because he's only going to be a restricted free agent after this year. So really 2 seasons of stats, he's averaging about 30 catches, 500 yards, and 3 touchdowns a year. He has the speed that teams overpay for, and I'm thinking of Tyrell Williams when I say that. Tyrell had way more production than Jalen. Don't get me wrong. He had more opportunity from some of our guys going down and him not having too many people to compete with. But he also, we kind of saw it, and that's why we didn't re-sign him and why we let him go and re-sign elsewhere. Is we thought his game was in some ways a little incomplete, and that he would end up commanding more money. He would end up commanding more money than what we thought would make sense. And that's kind of exactly what happened to him. So I do believe Jalen Guyton, if he were to go and have an 800-yard, 7-touchdown season, it puts him in this category of players that recently signed this year. That is right around $10 million a year for his next contract. You have Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who had an extra year of production, but had 2,100 yards receiving and 13 touchdowns. So if we go with this projection for Jalen of having a very solid season, a wide receiver number 3 studly season of 800 yards, 7 touchdowns, that would suddenly put him in the ballpark of about 1,800 yards and 13 touchdowns, which a little bit less yardage-wise than MVS. Same amount of touchdowns, but in 1 less year of production. So that, to me, is interesting. And don't tell me that MVS didn't have opportunity to put up bigger yards. He was not wedged behind 2 wide receiver number 1s the way Jalen is. Granted, he was behind the wide receiver number 1, but not 2 of them. And he has Aaron Rodgers throwing to him. So I do not feel bad for that individual for the opportunities that he did or didn't have before. And then Russell Gage at 26, 4 years, 2,000 yards, just about 9 touchdowns, $10 million a year. So again, another player that kind of justifies that valuation. Only a couple hundred extra yards than what Guyton would be at, 4 less touchdowns, and one more year of production. So really, Guyton could even come down on his yardage total and be in the 500 or 600 yards. And maybe he still gets around there. But I think it's going to take him to get borderline wide receiver 2 numbers to really justify that and having somebody bet on his upside. I have Christian Kirk on here as well, just to show that the Jaguars do like to overpay. The high watermark for a player that was a wide receiver 2 previously that was given the reins to a new team and they project him out to be a wide receiver 1. It's, a 4-season, 2,900 yards, 17 touchdown, start to his career. And that got him between 19 and 21 million. And again, last year he only had 982 yards and 5 touchdowns. So Guyton would not be that far off from that production with an 800 yards, 7 touchdown season, which is crazy. And that 10 million a year would put us at another 5th round compensatory pick. So keeping track, that's 2/5. Nasir Adderley. That would be a bummer for me to see Nasir go, but we did just draft Woods, and I know our defense can certainly survive with 3 stud safeties. We actually kind of call for it. But Nasir is also a guy that, although he's a perfect fit for Staley's defense, he is a prime candidate to get paid next year. In essentially 2 seasons, he's posted 170 tackles and 1 interception, but that doesn't jump off the page or anything like that. But he has the speed and tenacity that teams will overpay for, and he has steadily improved in each season. So let's say he has another season where he hovers around 100 tackles and a couple of turnovers paired with team success. I believe it puts him on a projection that is kind of like a floor of a DJ and Justin Reed, and maybe as high of a ceiling as a Marcus Williams. Marcus Williams so that would put, let's just say, Nasir's total with 90 tackles and 3 INTs. That would put him in the ballpark of 260 yards, 4 or 5 INTs. He'd be way behind Marcus Williams in the interception department, but 3 seasons of production, 260 tackles, that's not too far away from Marcus's 5 years, 320 tackles and 15 interceptions. DJ Reed and Nasir also should be credited for being such a willing run stopper as well. And those kind of hybrid players do end up moving the needle from a, pay standpoint. DJ Reed at 25 got a contract for 4 years or for 11 million a year. And in 4 years, he made 194 tackles and 4 INTs. So statistically, Nasir has a chance to really blow DJ Reed out of the water with this kind of season next year by having a very impressive tackle count and kind of matching that interception count as well. Justin Reed at 25 has 4 years under his belt with 315 tackles and 7 interceptions. He got paid $10.5 million a year, but he was on the Texans. So could a lot of meat have been left on the bone because he didn't come from a winning organization? That's an interesting thing to think about. So with all of this kept in mind, I personally see Nasir at right around 12 million plus a year, which would net us a 4th round pick. That would be pretty rad. Drew Tranquill, really quick, guys. We don't have to go over this too long. I didn't even provide comps, but I really think, Drew only has 11 starts in his 3-year career thus far. I think Drew's going to need a really solid year for somebody to reach to, take a chance in signing him to some decent money. If he goes and puts up a career year for himself like Kaiser White did last year, I think he runs a serious risk of being another Kaiser White. Sure, if he's the first one signed by a team like the Jaguars, they get a little too excited, who knows what might happen. But given that he's going to be splitting time probably with Murray, hopefully with Neiman a little bit, he might lose a couple snaps to Van Noy. I think he's the least likely to positively affect the compensatory formula. I would honestly prefer them to try to bring him back as cheaply as possible on another prove-it deal and give him a chance to show, hey, I can be healthy, I can be an impact player here, and then he goes and gets paid. So that's just me personally. If he does leave, I think the best possible compensation he gets is for around $3 or $4 million a year, which would put him at maybe the 7th round. But with how many players we have leaving, I think we're going to have quite a few that qualify for that 7th round pick, compensatory or 7th round compensatory pick. So unless we're bringing in a bunch of guys in that 7th round area, it's kind of redundant. I would rather us just not sign players in the compensatory period, personally. Kyle Van Noy gets a little exciting here. He's age 33 next year when he's on the free agent market again. He's a versatile stud with experience at edge, outside linebacker, and occasionally inside linebacker and sub packages. He'll likely be rotating at edge, and he might take snaps for us at inside linebacker as well. It's kind of my hope. I think he'd make for a great 3rd down package. Or it'd be really cool to see that NASCAR package show up again with Bosa bumping inside and, punishing some guards and Van Noy doing his thing on the edge. It's just a very fun combination to think about. Over the last 2 years, he's had decent production with 11 sacks and 15 tackles for a loss. If Van Noy shows that he can get to the passer and still play at a high level, and I say that because for some reason on the Pat McAfee show, Van Noy alluded to feeling like his market was low because players or teams didn't think he could produce outside of New England, which I thought was kind of ridiculous. I know Dolphins fans love the guy, so it's a very weird situation. But if he goes and performs, he could still get a good payday. You look at Chandler Jones at 32. He has 10.5 sacks. He had 10.5 sacks last year, 12 tackles for a loss. When I saw what he signed for, I was initially like, wow, that's crazy. Because I only remembered his big game against the Titans where he got 5 sacks in like the first week of the season. But it turns out he did still put up some extra production after that. Another 5.5 sacks, some tackles for a loss. Dude got paid. And when you prove you can take over a game, teams do tend to overpay for that as well. Campbell, Calais Campbell signed for $6.25 million a year at age 35. He's a different type of player, obviously, than Van Noy. He's more of an interior defensive lineman, even though he's listed as a defensive end. But that dude's big. He's a run stuffer. He's kind of just an everything for the Ravens. He's an absolute stud. So his stats don't matter as much. 5.5 sacks, 10 tackles for a loss in the last 2 years. Really, I think he just sets kind of a floor because of that production at $6.25 million a year. But that would be if Kyle Van Noy comes out this season and shows up, like gets like 6 sacks or something like that. That, would basically be more than Campbell's previous 2 years and more on pace for a good second edge for somebody to show like, hey, I don't have to be edge 3, this rotational role. I'm edge 3 on this team because they have Mack and Bosa, but on your team, I'm going to be edge 1B. That's, hopefully the kind of season he has, and I think a team will pay for that. So I would say, and then William Golston at 30 had 7.5 sacks in the last 2 years, 15 tackles for a loss, and he only signed for $4.5 million. So really, I'd want to see Van Noy's, sack total to try to be over that 5 or 6 sack mark. And at that point, he's averaging about 5 or 6 sacks for the previous 3 years. And that shows consistency, production. It would be in multiple schemes. So I think that'd be, a very good sign for him and a good opportunity for him to sign for a decent amount. I have 6 to 8 million as my projection, assuming that, with my Homer glasses on, he does really well. But that would put us in the 6th round. Bryce Callahan is interesting. He's going to be 31 next season, and the market for cornerbacks that are over 31 this year did not fare well for guys like Bryce. Stephon Gilmore is the gold standard. He was 31 and a half, and even though he's like a defensive player of the year, just absolute stud, has won the Super Bowl a few times, if you've heard about it. He only signed for $10 million a year, which is kind of crazy. So that right there, that is a low ceiling for a player that's as accomplished and skilled as he is. Casey Hayward is interesting because he's a little bit older, but bounced back after having an off year. He would represent what Bryce Callahan could do if, for whatever reason, injury forces Bryce to be a really full-time starter, to take, 80 to 90% of the snaps of the season, and shows up and shows out and does great, stays healthy, is very productive, and shows that he can be a, maybe not a CB1, but a CB2, or even a return to his role of being a very productive slot cornerback that can stay healthy. So that would be the absolute best case situation for him. But I think he would still need to prove, even after this year, he might get another prove it deal to just show he can stick around and keep producing, and that his injury woes are really behind him. I think it's more likely that we see him get a Logan Ryan, who's another slot cornerback type contract. Same age, similar production over their careers. Got the vet minimum this year. I think Bryce Callahan goes and gets the vet minimum next year. Maybe at best, if he does a little bit better, he gets up into like the 2 or 3 million a year point, which that would get closer to, a seventh round pick, but I would not count on it just yet. So overall, the outcome, what we can expect would be, based on my projections, what I'm hoping for, a fourth, 2 fifths, and 1 sixth. Remember, this is for our cancellation chart in 2023, which means this would be picks awarded to us in 2024, right around when Herbert's, contract is probably going to be extended. We probably won't have ramped up on him yet. Like, it will probably keep that cap hit low for the first couple of years. But this is going to be when we're going to need to start drafting an excess amount of players to make sure that we keep our, cap space low in the future years to come. So with these picks, that gives us 1/4. Example of fourth round compensatory picks this year was, your guy Calvin Austin, third, and Zach Tom, 2 guys that would have been, had spots until we got Salyer on our team. Zach Tom would have been a great pickup. And early fifths would have included Kennard and Shakir. So that right there, one of those guys would have been a great addition onto this roster. In the 5th round, where we have 2 picks right now, brought into like this last, to make it, relevant for you, to bring it into last year, 2 5th round picks were John Ridgway and Kingsley Enagbare. Early 6th that we also could have picked up, that weren't compensatory picks, but were there early in the 6th round. There's a very small difference between the two, were Matt Ariza, Darian Beavers, and Amari Barno. I think all 3 of those guys were on the Guilty as Charged podcast's radar as potential fits for us. In the 6th round, we would have 1 pick as well. And this year, that would have translated to Tyreek Castro Fields, Kalia Davis, who's someone I was high on, or somebody in the early 7th, like Bo Melton or Isaiah Thomas. So these aren't just useless picks, guys. These are picks that could have brought in considerable talent that would have served a role on our roster. So it's just important to think about, especially as these luxury players that we have right now, like a Khalil Mack. Like, that's not a guy that we would necessarily have the cap space for if Herbert wasn't on a rookie contract. You can kind of look at Mack and Allen as 2 great examples of older vets that are here because they represent that win now culture that we have, and what we can afford to be paying out for players when we have a quarterback making $7 or $8 million a year. I think, Max making plus 20 right now. Allen's making plus 20. Would we be able to retain those guys if we were also paying a quarterback? I don't know. It's going to be a little sticky in a couple of years. But again, they're going to push his contract hit out anyway. A couple of years, we'll be fine. I think both those guys end up seeing the end of their deals. Now let's go back to a slide from our original video together on the compensatory picks. Remember this trade back when the Patriots and Bill Belichick traded their 3rd round pick for San Francisco's 5th round pick in Trent Brown. Just slid down 2 rounds and picked up who was going to be Pro Bowl right tackle. Insane. How could we do that? And he ended up getting them a 3rd round compensatory pick in 2020. Awesome pick. Mike, this is like my dream come true scenario. So how do we do that? How could TT do a BB? That's my really lame question of the day. I wrote this before, obviously, May 10th, so I apologize that this might be coming to you a little late. So let's just say, imagine on May 12th or 13th or whenever you're reading this, the Chargers and the Jaguars agree to terms. The Jaguars get a Chargers 2023 third rounder, and we get a Jacksonville fifth rounder in Jawaan Taylor, who ends up turning into a third or fourth round compensatory pick in 2024. It's kind of exciting, right? Like, why would this work? How would this work? Well, Jawaan Taylor to me represents the exact type of player that you want to target when you're making these trades. And forgive me, I haven't scouted Taylor thoroughly. I'm just going off of his, pedigree, and that he was seen as a first round talent that fell to the early second round when he was drafted, and has been on a team that has been largely dysfunctional. So he has the athletic traits, he had the college production, he is somebody that on paper has been has slightly disappointed, I'd say. Like PFF has his grade right around the low 60s. So it's not like he's been abysmal, but he has underwhelmed. And I think a lot of it can be attributed to his quarterbacks that he's played with. The dysfunction of the Jacksonville Jaguars organization certainly plays a hand in it. And, he also, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, he just, in general, has been in, a very tough situation. And if brought to a team where he's surrounded by stud offensive linemen, could he absolutely take off this year with Justin Herbert at the helm? I absolutely think so. I think that's that's an easy sell. So the other interesting thing, and what you need to look at, what I look at before I actually start scouting, guys, is what teams have drafted a replacement already for a player that's in a contract year, if that makes sense. Walker Little was drafted by the Jaguars in the early second round, I believe, earlier mid-second round last year. They re-signed Cam Robinson in the offseason. So that tells me, and it's important to know, Jawaan Taylor wasn't drafted by Balky, or however you say his name. Jawaan Taylor was drafted by their previous GM. Don't know his name off the top of my head, but he was drafted by the previous GM. Balky drafted Walker Little. So who do you think the organization's more loyal to at this point? Taylor's in his contract year. He's not been re-signed. There's an opportunity to go and grab him now, give him a year of a stud offense that is going to play in primetime games, and all of a sudden his market value next year is going to be way, way, way better, in my opinion. So that's actually the presentation. So yeah, we're right back to compensatory picks where we all started together, which is really cool for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. I think one thing I'd love to hear you chatting about in the comments, if you'd like, is there another right tackle that you think would be a great fit for us to trade for? And that's why I didn't include Storm or Pipkins in my, market projections. Like, could Pipkins, start? I really don't understand why everyone's assuming that Pipkins is the starter when he never took the job from Storm all year last year. That's kind of a funny thing for me, just because Duke Merriweather posted his client list and said, hey, these are the guys that are the most improved. Well, hey, guys, I'm a real estate agent by trade. That's what I do for work. If I posted a list of my clients and said, hey, these are the buyers or sellers that had the best real estate transactions this last year, would you actually believe me on that? I don't know. That's just me. But that just cracks me up. So personally, yeah, maybe one of them comes in and performs at a starting caliber level, even if they were to just be average on that line. If they could somehow just be average, yes, they could sign a compensatory pick worthy contract next year, and that'd be great. But I think there's more upside by going after somebody that at one point was never seen as an undrafted guy, wasn't reached for in the third round, that was a reach, but was a borderline first round talent and just needs to be put in the right situation to reclaim some of that former glory. So tell me what you guys think. If you have another suggestion on a right tackle you think we should pick up, I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, bolt up, and I look forward to continuing our conversations throughout the season.